Good afternoon, and welcome to the Middle East Forum's webinar series. I'm Daniel Pipes, president of the Middle East Forum, and it's my pleasure to discuss today with Danon, chairman of World Likud and candidate for Israel's parliament, the Knesset, in the forthcoming November 1st election in the Likud party, about his new book on his experiences as Israel's ambassador to the United Nations in New York from 2015 to 2020. Prior to his United Nations role, he served in 3 sessions of the Knesset. He has a BA from Florida International University, an MA from the Hebrew University. He completed his military service with the rank of lieutenant. His first book, The Will to Prevail, in 2012, makes the case for Israel to develop and sustain an independent policy. And his new book is called In the Lion's Den. This year came out, and it recounts his UN years. Danny and I have known each other since 2009. In 2013, I wrote an article about him in which I noted that he has 3 outstanding qualities, quote, a devotion to principle, a mastery of tactics, and the ability to articulate a vision, unquote. I concluded the article by stating that, quote, I hope and expect he stays true to his principles and rises to the point where he can end the recent desultory politics in the Jewish state. That was in 2013, unquote. So, with no further ado, please, Danny, Mr. Ambassador, tell us about your book, about your years at the United Nations.
Thank you very much, Daniel. It's a pleasure being here today with you. This time it's on Zoom. I hope next time it will be in person. Also, when I was serving as Israel's ambassador to the UN, we had a very interesting engagement with the Middle East Forum. And I'm happy to have a discussion with you today about my new book and about what's happening today in the region. So with your permission, I will start about the UN. You know, when I came to the UN, I knew there would be a lot of hostility against Israel, but I was surprised to learn that actually we have a lot of friends. The problem with most of the friends we have at the UN, that they support us quietly and not publicly. And for me, it was a real surprise because I came from the Knesset, from the Israeli parliament, where it is exactly the opposite. In the Knesset, usually people would say good things about you in public, but that won't be the case behind closed doors. And in the UN, it was the opposite. You know, publicly they would speak against us, but privately, you know, they would actually be very friendly. They will support and even admire us. And one of my goals was to close that gap between the private UN and the public UN. And I did it through a few ideas I came up with. The first one is to bring our tradition and history into action. Many events, celebrating many holidays, and basically changing the narrative about Israel at the UN. The second part was the technology. I used the advantage we have in terms of being the startup nation and offering solutions for many countries. And the third part was actually bringing ambassadors to Israel. You know, you came many times, Daniel, to Israel, and you know, when you come to Israel, it's amazing, you know, to spend time here. And that's what I did. I brought, you know, more than 100 UN ambassadors over the years to come to Israel, to visit us, to see the challenges from the north to the south, mainly the security issues, and to meet the people. And that was very helpful. And I think the combination between those 3 pillars helped me a lot to be effective and to be able to change things at the UN. And I will give you one example. When I decided to run for a position to become the chairman of the legal committee at the UN, you know, many of my colleagues in Jerusalem were shocked and actually called the prime minister back then, Netanyahu was the prime minister, and they told him, why Ambassador Danon is running for a position? We never play offense, we play only defense at the UN. And I convinced him that we can actually win this race, and we did. I worked quietly, and we received in secret ballots the support of 109 member states, and only 44 voted against me. And for me, it was a great personal success to actually prove that we have friends at the UN and we can win in a hostile place like the UN. But unfortunately, we still have the hatred. We still have those ridiculous resolutions condemning Israel. And for me, it was unique to work with two US administrations. And in my book, In the Lion's Den, I describe, how was it to work with President Obama and his team, and with President Trump and his team. Actually, one of the things that I mentioned, that with President Obama, it wasn't too bad. People usually think that, it was really bad, and only with Trump we were able to do things. But I tell the stories in the book that we did a lot with Ambassador Samantha Power. But nobody will remember it because of the shameful decision of the President Obama to push a resolution against Israel a week before he left office. And I refer to resolution 2334. And I recall, the minute when Ambassador Power told me that she would abstain in the vote, I told her, Samantha, nobody will remember what we achieved together at the UN. Everybody would speak about this shameful vote that you're gonna abstain. And that's exactly what happened, everybody speak about that moment where the US decided to leave us and not to support us. And I was sitting there by myself. I knew that there would be a new administration, but it wasn't easy. It was, I really felt in the Lion's Den at that vote in the UN Security Council. The resolution passed. I want to remind you, because it was in 2016, but it called our presence in the old city of Jerusalem a flagrant violation of international law. For us, it was hard to accept such a language, and especially when it came from our closest ally, the United States of America. But after that, President Trump came in, and we were able, together with Ambassador Nikki Haley, to achieve great things for Israel and for the US. In general, I'm optimistic about our positions in the international arena. I think today more and more leaders understand that it's not about Israel, and the fact we were able to sign the Abraham Accords, that was a great proof that we can do things without actually making mistakes with the Palestinians or concessions to the Palestinians. And I recall Secretary Kerry when he actually was walking the media after the vote, he explained that he did it in order to support us. And he said there will be no peace with any Arab nation before the Israelis will sign a deal with the Palestinians. And I said back then in 2016 exactly the opposite. I said the only way to move forward with the Palestinians is first after we will build bridges with other Arab countries. Then they will realize that they cannot defeat us. We can speak about the victory approach, Daniel, and then we can basically sign a deal with them. And that's what's happening now. We signed the important peace treaties with the Gulf countries. Hopefully with the Saudis, we'll see some development. President Biden is coming to Israel on Wednesday. I don't think much will happen here, but maybe in Saudi Arabia, we'll see some progress in normalizing their relations with Israel. And I think we should continue to develop bridges with other countries in the region, and hopefully the Palestinians will realize that they will have to work with us. One point, with your permission, about the elections in Israel. So we have a strong democracy, but sometimes we look at your system and we say maybe we have to change the system because we are heading for another cycle of elections. This government couldn't last. It was a bad government. The only one thing they had in common was a desire to remove Netanyahu out of office, which they did. But after that, they had nothing in common. We are heading for another cycle in November. We don't know the results. I hope we will get the majority. I decided to come back and support the party in order to get the votes, and hopefully we will be able to build a strong government led by the Likud party. and we can deal with the challenges. Today we have challenges from the north, mainly Hezbollah, from the south, from Iran, but we also have domestic issues. You know, we have seen riots last May from the Arab Israelis, not all of them, but you know, a minority, a very radical and dangerous minority. So we have to deal with those radicals as well. So we have a lot of things to do, and I hope that in November we'll be able to form a strong government. I want to thank you for your involvement with Israel and the Middle East. You know, I know some of you personally, and I know that you are very knowledgeable, very involved. One thing to stay optimistic, you know, despite everything we'll discuss today, the people of Israel are happy. You know, we feel safe. We have, you know, a strong economy, great culture, and people in general are very happy in Israel. So I think that's what we will try to do, to ensure the safety of the people of Israel so they can live safely and become a stronger nation. I would love Daniel now to open the discussions and have a chat with you and these distinguished guests.
Well, thank you so much, Danny. I appreciate your insights. In particular, I noted in your book when you said how the UN is the opposite of the Knesset, and that the Knesset, they praise you in public and criticize you in private, and the United Nations is the reverse. I understand the Knesset, but why do you think there is this persistent pattern of criticism of Israel in public, even though in a private, in a secret ballot, you won by over 2-1 the position? Why is there no change publicly?
So I think, you know, in the book, I describe it as the gang mentality. You know, in the UN, most countries belong to a regional group. And when you look at the group, some of them, you know, we have very strong bilateral relations. But when it comes to the multilateral level, they tend to be very hostile to us. And I think the reason is that in the group, usually the loud voices, the radical voices will dictate the resolutions. Take, for example, the Arab League. You know, in the Arab League, you have moderate countries like Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Morocco, Bahrain, and a few others. They are not leading anything there. They will follow the radical countries like Syria, Algeria, Lebanon sometimes, and they will allow them to set the tone. And it's not only in the Arab League. In many regional groups, you will find, you know, those countries who are very hostile to Israel becoming very active. Even when you look at the European countries, you know, when you look at Ireland, I don't know why, but they are very hostile to Israel. And they put so much energy against Israel at the UN. And you will see other countries following them. And that's the problem I had with my colleagues. Listen, you don't have to follow them. Read the resolution. You know, let's discuss the reality and then move forward. But many times they will just follow those voices, and then it becomes the EU position or the Arab League position. I think we are in a better situation, but we have to demand more. And that's what I'm doing in many bilateral meetings. I tell them it's not enough to support us only bilaterally. We want you to do the same when it comes to the UN.
It's particularly ironic when you mention the various Arab League member states, because the ones that have reasonable or good relations with Israel are far more powerful than what? Lebanon, Syria, Algeria. It's not much of a powerhouse group there. Ironic that they should be leading the way. You mentioned at some length Resolution 2334. It was clearly a very contentious and emotional issue at the time. That was late 2016. It's almost December 2022. So 5.5 years later, what significance do you see that resolution had? What legacy does it have? Is it just a historical footnote, or is it something important?
Unfortunately, it's not only a footnote. Unfortunately, today there will be reports every few months following the resolutions. and those reports will be submitted and discussed in the Security Council. And also our enemies would try to go back to the resolution in every discussion, and they will fight that it will be included in the language of any resolution. And when I was there together with Ambassador Haley, we were fighting back that it will not be included in the language of any further resolutions. And I think that's the problem we have. And I have to tell you, Daniel, the Palestinians, over the years, they became very effective in attacking Israel at the UN. They don't speak about peace directly with us. They don't invest in building their society or their economy, but they are very sophisticated in attacking Israel, in spreading lies against Israel. And that's what they're doing also with this resolution. They will go back to it, and they will try to leverage this resolution when they go to attack us on other organs like the ICC or other UN bodies.
Does it have a significance outside the United Nations?
I would say yes, but not in the general public. But basically, when it comes, to ministries of foreign affairs, they will refer to that resolution, and when they want to attack us, they will use it. So I don't think it's changing the facts on the ground like most UN resolutions, but when it comes to controlling the narrative or setting the agenda for the international community, it supports the Palestinians' claim.
And overall, would you say that Israel's situation at the United Nations is getting better, getting worse, or staying the same?
I think it, and I describe it in my book, In the Lion's Den, that it's getting better. I think today more and more countries realize that it's not about us, it's about the Palestinians, and especially after the Abraham Accords. When I flew to the UAE before the Accords were signed, and it was a very sophisticated operation to get there for me personally. And today we have 14 flights a week from Tel Aviv to Dubai and Abu Dhabi. And I think today more people realize that basically, we want to live peacefully. But the problem is that, the Palestinians, they have radicals controlling Gaza. They have a corrupted regime controlling parts of Judea and Samaria, and they don't blame us for everything. So I think today it's in a much better situation than it was 7 years ago when I entered the UN.
Good. Could you give us 2 or 3 pieces of advice that you would offer to your successors in that unusual position?
Yeah, the first one would be to reach out to everybody. You never know when you will need those people. And, even if it's a small, tiny country, sometimes they have the vote like Russia and the US. So you need to reach out. And that's what I did. I hosted many ambassadors for Shabbat dinners. I brought them to Israel. And you never know when you will need them. The second thing is to invest time and energy with the UN officials. People tend to think that the UN is only the member states, but you have the bureaucracy of the UN, and it's like a state, huge budget, thousands of employees. And I think we need to have strong connections and relations with the UN organs and to know how to work the bureaucracy of the UN. Many times I found it to be very effective when you know how things work in the UN.
Good. You mentioned Israeli politics. Let me ask you, as a candidate for the Knesset, what are your priorities?
So, many people come and tell me, listen, you served as a successful ambassador. We want you to be the Minister of Foreign Affairs. And that's flattering, and I enjoy, diplomacy. And, I know you, Daniel, for so many years, and we always like to discuss foreign affairs in general. But, after being here for more than a year, I think the issue of the domestic security of Israelis today should be the first priority. We speak a lot about Iran, Hezbollah, Hamas, but today you have a problem that Israelis are afraid to walk in the streets of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Today you have a problem of organized crime and protection all over Israel. So I think law and order, that's something we will have to bring back into the streets of Israel We have to empower the police forces, the military, and actually allow the Israelis to build a strong economy and a strong military. That will be my first priority. But I learned that in politics, you never know. You have to wait to see who will form the government, what the coalition will look like, and then I can know which position to look.
You were not terribly complimentary about the coalition government of the past year. Is there anything positive about it? Any developments that were that it achieved? Anything positive?
So from the beginning, they lowered the expectations. They said we are not going to deal with any, foreign affairs or major issues. We're going to deal only with domestic issues, and they failed on all fronts. One thing I think that they did like an okay, and you can tell them that it was, well organized. I think the issue of COVID. I think in general, we learned from past experiences, and we dealt properly with the COVID during the last year. But when you look at what's happening today with the economy, with security, even with foreign affairs, President Biden is coming to Israel, and I put an op-ed about it. He actually, for the first time, is going to visit an official Palestinian institution in East Jerusalem. And that will be a dangerous precedent, because basically he's signaling to the Palestinians that in the future they will have some kind of ownership over parts of Jerusalem. Even President Obama didn't do it. Usually the protocol that you meet the Israeli prime minister and president, and then you go to Ramallah or Bethlehem to meet the president of the PA. On Friday morning, President Biden is insisting to come and make a statement in a hospital in East Jerusalem, and actually sending a clear message to the Palestinians about their future possession, sovereignty over Jerusalem, which is something that we will never allow.
Yes, I read your op-ed in the Jerusalem Post. It wasn't quite clear. What exactly is the problem? Is it that the Israeli authorities will not be joining him in Eastern Jerusalem, and there will be Palestinian Authority representatives there? Is that the problem?
That's also, a problem. But I think it's also the fact that he chose to go and visit a Palestinian institution in East Jerusalem. It's a statement. And I think in the future you will see other leaders coming from Europe, and they will follow Biden's step, that they will do the same. And that's something which we should not accept. In the past, when I brought the Secretary General of the UN to Israel, we have some kind of negotiations before any official visit. And I was very strong about that we will not accept it. So you have ways to send messages. But basically, I think for us, it's an insult. And it's also creating false expectations for the Palestinians. The embassy of the US moved to Jerusalem. Jerusalem is united under Israeli sovereignty. It's not going to change. And by doing that, it's actually telling them we are heading to that direction. Maybe the next step we will open a consulate. Maybe we'll do something more. I think it's going to be bad for us and bad for the Palestinians.
Just one more question on this. The consulate can only open, the US consulate can only open with the permission of Israel. By extension, this visit to the Palestinian institution in Eastern Jerusalem requires Israeli approval, or the American government can just do it by itself? Are you criticizing
with the consulate first, I don't really understand why you need a consulate if you have an embassy. Right. I'm not familiar with any precedent that you have in one city and the embassy and the consulate. That's something which doesn't make any sense. Regarding the visit, we will not forbid the US president to do whatever he wants. We will respect him. We will accommodate his wishes, when he comes to visit Israel. But I can tell you that I think it also related to the fact that we have a very inexperienced Prime Minister Lapid, who doesn't have the knowledge and the experience on foreign affairs. I think we should have solved it in advance. When we had the advanced team coming to Israel, we should have sent a very clear message to them that it will not be well received. But we know when you have a Lapid as a Prime Minister and as a Minister of Foreign Affairs, he's limited in his capabilities.
You mentioned Israel victory. You sound like you're positive about it. Can you give your thoughts on the notion of Israeli victory and Palestinian defeat? Is this something that you believe is a way forward?
So I'm a very strong follower of Zev Jabotinsky, who was a great scholar, a great Zionist leader. And one of the ideas he brought to Zionism was the idea of the Iron Wall, which basically said that we have to be strong to defeat our enemies, and only then we can speak with them about peace. And I think that's the reality today in the region. Unfortunately, with Hamas, we haven't been able to defeat them. Every time we are buying more time until the next conflict. But I serve as Deputy Minister of Defense, and I'm aware of the challenges. But I think in the long run, we will have to defeat Hamas, and it will be much better for the Palestinians, because then it will allow them, maybe, hopefully, to bring a new kind of leadership that will be able to invest in the people and not in the terror regime. So yes, I do believe that we will have to eventually go back to the idea of an iron wall, of a victory mindset, and then we can think about the future.
And I acknowledge that this idea of Israel victory is in some way a descendant of Jabotinsky's Iron Wall, which, by the way, will have its 100th anniversary next year, 2023. What happened to it? What happened to this idea? Why did it get lost? I mean, why does it not remain a powerful notion in the successor parties and in the Likud so many years after Jabotinsky, given your respect for his work and that of many others in the Likud party?
Well, I think what we have seen in the last few decades that, many leaders, including in the Likud, they will follow the polls and the public opinion. I worked with many prime ministers, and I think the last one who actually was leading directly, strongly, was Prime Minister Shamir, who ignored public opinion, he ignored the polls, and he ignored the media. Yep. And he told me once, I recall it, I was very young, he told me, we will do what's good for the Jewish people, period. And he didn't care about the rest. I think today, it's not the case, unfortunately. And many leaders are looking at, the way it will be perceived, what will be the public opinion about those kind of issues. And I think in order to be a strong leader and to lead Israel, we have to start thinking about going back to the Shamir's mentality of doing what's right and not doing what's popular.
Very good. Well, with that, let me thank you so much for giving us your time, especially as election season has begun. Most appreciated, and wish you well with your career. And hope
thank you very much, Daniel. And I'm sure many people will enjoy the read of my new book, In the Lion's Den. It's available on Amazon and all over the bookstores.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.